a quick Q&A with the audience, and I am looking at you. You will have the chance to ask a few questions to our lovely panel. There's 2 volunteers of the ChangeNOW team running around with microphones. So if you have a question, then please do. I see one over here and another one over there. Let's start with the lady over here and then over to the gentleman in the front.
Is this fine? Yeah. Okay.
And please don't hesitate to very quickly say who you are and what you do, just so that we get an idea. But let's keep that very brief. Thank you.
Sure, yes. So my name is Adenike, and I'm actually over here with World's Youth for Climate Justice. Thank you, Maja, for the kind shout-out. So my question actually would be in 2 parts. First would be to the youth activists, and then maybe Maja could jump in, and Bianca could jump in, up to you, would be that while I understand that there is a lot of push that states need to come together and at these collaborations, like at these conferences, like all the COPs that are happening, don't you think that, you know, this has, even though it's slow, it has come a long way, and if these negotiations are fundamentally to change, then how do you think that could happen? That could be progressive. Also, second, how do you see yourself in that position that Maja mentioned with youth negotiators to bring this consensus of maybe 193 states that come with different agendas to these conferences, while having while coming to an agreement to come to an ambitious push and an ambitious agreement that also, mind you, can be implemented later on, because most of these agreements are usually soft law and they're very hard to trickle down into domestic laws. So how do you see that happening? And it would be interesting to know from the youth perspective. So, yeah.
Few questions merged into one, but maybe you can pick up on nuances of that question. And please, whoever feels called, you can grab the microphone.
Okay, so, hello?
Maybe just a moment. Try again, please.
Hello?
Well, okay, so it works. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm going to try to be quick. First, most of the countries in the world are either dictatorship or authoritarian governments. And so these whole models rely on a system that assumes that people are willing even to talk and go around the table. So that's one that I learned the hard way. The second thing is, I think, while I agree with you when you say that change through these institutions is very incremental, I do believe that the suggestions that you're suggesting are very incremental as well. And in history, change has never happened in an incremental way. Change happened when people mobilized, when people pushed government to act. And we know that, some of us, because we worked in Brussels at the time of the European Green Deal, and the only reason why the European Green Deal was got is because we mobilized and we led the largest environmental movement in history. And it was the same with the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, like if young people wouldn't have occupied Nancy Pelosi's offices and all those MPs and Congress people, it wouldn't have happened. And so there's a big part of me who really wants to put all of this incremental change to the bean and say, let's focus on empowering communities. Let's focus on empowering grassroots activists. Let's focus on empowering youth-led mobilizing, on climate justice, BIPOC-led, queer-led, so that they can bring the change and hold policymakers accountable. Because even if we get the RIA, the European Green Deal, and all those big policies, we have a Bolsonaro, we have a Meloni, we have a Donald Trump. So for me, it's really, really time to move out from this incremental change and really put pressure in a people-powered way.
Adenike?
Can you hear me now? Okay, yeah. So, just as Nathan has said, talking about governance type, some dictatorship and, some they are democratic in governance. But as well, I really feel like the title of this panel, it still boils down to governance. All of this crisis that is happening, it has to do with governance system, the system that needs to change in order for the change we need to happen. For example, let's talk about COP, the United Nations Conference of Parties. COP have started right from when I've been born, since 28 years. Now imagine, up till now, I'm grown up now, and we are still negotiating. So one question we have to ask is, are we going to negotiate all through our lifetime? When are we going to start that implementation phase? When are we going to move from that negotiation phase to implementation phase? Because we have leaders that we come to COP with beautiful speeches of how they are doing this, they are doing that. But why can't we ask ourselves what has been done in the past 1 year? How are we setting this pace? What are the implementation we need to start taking out? We need to start rolling out, How do we phase out fossil fuel, which is the big deal that we need to deal with? One of those things that, that looks strange to me was when it takes 27 years for the loss and damage to be in the formal test. For us to accept that, yes, we need a loss and damage fund. What happened to COP, the first COP, the second COP? And why is it up to the 28th COP that we have to start talking about the loss and damage, like putting it on the agenda? And up to now, we are entering into another COP. What has been done to the loss and damage fund? We are here talking about operationalization. Do we have to still wait to set up a system? It's a fast thing. Climate crisis is not waiting, it's happening. As far as we have, there's some form of changes, a kind of progress, it's not as much as how we expect it to be. We need fast changes, in order to deal with the crisis. And it has to do with changes in governance system that we make this change to become possible. And so if we continue to go with conferences like this, that negotiation, we'll keep negotiating. When we come the next day, we keep from where we start from. Another year, it's a slow process, and we don't need it right now. We need a fast system of switching from negotiation to implementation. What are we implementing? How much have we implemented? Where are the accountability of what has been implemented in the last COP? We need to start that phase of governance system that could help us to move ahead.
So what I hear is changes in governance, but also big pressure and big ideas and movement. Bianca, you wanted to share a perspective.
Someone said to me the other day, they think the world is in puberty. And I really want to think of it that way. I think we're going through a turbulent time. Unfortunately, we know that the changing environment is not going to make governments easier. It's going to make it harder. We know that we've got to question absolutely everything. And at the same time, we have to build consensus and come to solutions. And that's very difficult. There's a real tension in that. I think we want to look at new forms of governments, for example, like the global assemblies. We haven't mentioned those yet, where citizens are called within nations to come and speak for the citizens. I think increasingly we will want to see that type of governance, perhaps within nations. And very much back to what Maja said on international governance. We need to think in a global way of ourselves as citizens on this planet, rather than of just the village or the community. And one thing's also clear is that organic change isn't enough. So, for example, the gender gap has widened. The UN thinks it's at 300 years now. The pandemic has made it worse because women lost their jobs and sooner than men, and they didn't come back to work again.
300 years for gender.
So 300, if we wait for an organic development of closing the gender gap, it'll be 300 years.
To Nathan's point of incremental changes.
Exactly, and the emissions are still rising. So we can see, the talking, as you say, Adenike, isn't bringing the solutions, and we need the action now, and we need radical action, I'm afraid.
Maja, want to share
just a
perspective
few
as well?
comments. I hear a lot of frustration with the the COPs and discussion, which is shared, completely shared by the commissioners on the Climate Governance Commission, completely shared. And I would not necessarily agree that the proposals are incremental, some of which I mentioned. There are others. For example, we're considering a proposal for the big four emitters to make a pact for the planet with urgent, clear action agendas on behalf, fulfilling their leadership role immediately, urgently. And a lot of the other measures I talked about would be very radical. So, for example, this ICJ opinion, this is an incredible step for, potentially new legal guidance from the highest court in the world, telling states exactly what their obligations are. This is not a small shift. This is like a structural shift. But we need the youth activists, we need the activists generally, NGOs, civil society around the world, to also understand the power of these governance levers, and that they're actually often within reach if we work together, we talk together, and figure out, indeed, what are the key pressure points, what are the key asks that we need immediately, and then work together with a unified voice to really put the pressure. We absolutely need to put the pressure on.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your question.
Thank you so much, Maja. It was your answer was also an answer, a question to what a follow-up question that I had to Nathan's. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. The gentleman in the second row to my right.
My name is Christian Thalacker. I'm from Luxembourg, and this has been a very important discussion. Thank you. I used to do due diligence, and now I'm looking for inspiration, so I volunteer on a CSA in Luxembourg. And my question is to do with what tax, for example, would you fight for, would you litigate in the correct jurisdictions? For example, Luxembourg is home to almost 6 trillion. It's the biggest in the world for fund administration. What tax would you litigate, would you fight for to fuel climate justice? And the reason I bring it up is the analyst at the Swedish Central Bank, Christina Cella, said that current stock portfolios are aligned with a 2.77 rise Celsius. And she said, this is unsustainable, this won't work. And so not only do the mutual fund companies and the management companies need to join board, but also the bond markets. Well,
Finance-related question. Maja, do you want to respond?
Sure. Your question was taxation policy in particular?
For example, like you could have 40 basis points or a sliding scale.
Yeah.
So like if you have a mutual fund company that is Paris aligned or better.
Yes. Yeah. That's like a specialist, very specialist question. It's an excellent question. And I also love where you're going because you're talking about actual regulation and also using taxation as a key, regulatory mechanism, which we're still not doing, nearly not across the board. Right, and we at the Climate Governance Commission, we did research on, kind of a package of key vital policies that each country should be implementing. Right now, countries are just reinventing the wheel, if that, to try to work up the policies of excellence that would drive finance in the right directions, drive, green innovation, clean tech, phase out legacy fossil fuel industries. So. What I would say is that there probably is some thinking on that. I don't know specifically on that issue, but I can connect you. But also this is like exactly the thinking we should have. We need the enabling regulation to drive the financial allocation and also the system change, the clean tech revolution. And just one point about that in terms of these enabling policies, regulations. Research at Oxford has found that if we do a decisive transition model with the proper policy, financial, regulatory support for clean tech, energy transition, including finance, if we get the right policies in place, we'll save ourselves $12 trillion by doing, this is Oxford studies, by doing this decisive transition model. So exactly the thinking you have is what we need across various sectors and various levers to drive the transition.
Nathan.
But also, like, you know, like when I was a youth advisor, the most asked question that I had was like, what is the solution? Like, is there one solution that would really solve things? And there is one. Like, there's never been as many billionaires in the world as there is today. So until we have fixed that issue, the climate crisis will not be fixed. And with the pandemic, with the recent also, you know, like turbulence in the sort of global economy, the billionaires are getting richer and richer. And so at some point, the true space, if we can say, to litigate that is the G7. We need to get the wealthiest country around the table and ask them to tax not only the individual wealth, but also the shareholder wealth. And if we don't do that, I really don't see how we will fund the 100 billion that has been promised in 2015 to solve, you know, climate adaptation and mitigation, but also any kind of green and fair transition that we need globally. And I think until we have that fixed, and you know, I told that to Emmanuel Macron literally 5 months ago, and he was laughing. So I think that's something to think about.
Thank you, Nathan, for bringing that perspective as well. And thank you for the question. Any other questions from the audience? I think we would have time for one more. Yeah? Over here.
Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Pooja. Nice to see you, Nathan. What is an example of like a successful governance structure that you've seen that you'd like to be replicated? That's it. Thank you.
Precise. Maja.
Yeah. If you look at New Zealand's national climate governance structure, it's quite exemplary. They tell me that it's modeled more or less on the UK structure. So you can compare and contrast. But for example, in New Zealand, what they've done is created an executive council of all the heads of various ministries that are implicated in the addressing climate change. So finance, agriculture, environment, of course, etc. So defragmenting kind of the authority. So environmental sort of regulation and the ministry is not sidelined or marginalized, which is kind of a governance failure you see in many states. So they have this executive body of the heads of the ministries reporting directly to the Prime Minister with clear climate goals as enshrined in law, and they have a climate commission or like a policy council body which has scientific advice on climate action and policies. So you have the science, which is and the policy advice from an independent body, arm's length body, which connects to this issue of how you connect national level to international obligations proactively, and then you have defragmentation of the governance at the national level, having all of the different ministries and bodies involved with clear legally bound sort of targets and transformations needed. So this is, I would say, a good model. It's not perfect. It can be strengthened already based on experience, but one could look by analogy at the international level. How could we do that at the international level? How do we make sure this is, you know, on an urgency basis? How do we have the consultative kind of capacities of citizen assemblies? But I think it's a fairly good model. But there are other models, you know, also corporate governance models that are very fascinating, and other international regimes that are quite well designed. But that's one notable example, I would say, in the climate space.
Thanks, Maja. Bianca.
I think it's also important to look at emergency responses. I sat next to the national advisor on the vaccination program in Ireland yesterday, and they had a 98% vaccination rate in that country, which is I have to say, pretty amazing. You've got to look at, you know, since we're in an emergency, we've got to look at emergency governance here. So we have to have far faster responses with far more drastic, far-reaching measures. And this is something that we aren't seeing anywhere at the moment, or not enough, right? And this is what we now have to talk about. And this is why I'm very encouraged to hear that we might set up an emergency council at UN level to start implementing this at national level as well, as we did for the pandemic.
Yes, completely agree with that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that is actually a good last statement here, that we do need to reimagine the architecture of global governance, but we also need emergency governance, because we are right on track to breach the 1.5 degree warming, and we shouldn't, and we have already breached several of the planetary boundaries. And so thank you for the work that you do. I thought you really provided some very thought-provoking ideas and perspectives here, and give it up for this wonderful panel, and much success with the work that you do. Thank you.